The deafening roar of police sirens sliced through Manhattan's morning air like razor blades. The sound mixed with something else, shouting, car doors slamming, and what sounded suspiciously like helicopters? Cassandra Cass Montenegro's eyes snapped open, her heart hammering against her ribs as if she'd just survived a car crash. Her head felt like someone had used it as a percussion instrument for an entire mariachi band, and the brilliant sunlight flooding through floor-to-ceiling windows made her squeeze her eyes shut again immediately. What the hell happened to my blackout curtains? She tried to sit up and froze. These weren't her threadbare sheets from her cramped Brooklyn apartment. These were Egyptian cotton, probably thread count higher than her credit score. And this bed. This was definitely not her lumpy futon. Panic started creeping up her spine as she took in the room. Sleek modern furniture that screamed more money than God, original artwork on the walls and a view that, oh my God, overlooked Central Park. Her eyes landed on the mahogany nightstand and her blood turned to ice. There, in an elegant silver frame, was a photo that made her question her entire sanity. Herself, radiant in a white dress, laughing as she kissed Derek Blackstone. The Derek Blackstone, Manhattan's most ruthless real estate mogul and the man she'd spent the last 2 years trying to destroy in court. No, 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 she whispered, then louder. What the... The bedroom door exploded open with such force it hit the wall, and Derek Blackstone himself burst through like he was storming a fortress. He was shirtless, wearing only black boxer briefs that left little to imagination, his dark hair disheveled, and, most alarmingly, he was carrying a Glock 19, his piercing green eyes scanning the room for threats with military precision. Where are they? He barked, the gun trained toward the windows. Cass, talk to me. Are you hurt? I heard screaming and... Cass pointed at him with a shaking finger, clutching the silk sheet to her chest like armor. You! Her voice cracked. Why are you... Why am I... What is this? She grabbed the wedding photo and waved it like evidence in a courtroom. Derek's weapon slowly lowered as confusion replaced the warrior alertness in his expression. For a moment, he looked almost... vulnerable. Almost human. You don't remember? His voice was softer now, uncertain in a way that was completely unlike the confident bastard she knew from their legal battles. Remember what? Cass was practically hyperventilating. The last thing I remember is being at Murphy's pub last night, celebrating because I finally got the judge to approve my class action lawsuit against Blackstone Industries for displacing low-income families. And now, I wake up in your bed with a picture of us married. Outside, the chaos was intensifying. Derek rushed to the window and peered through the blinds, his jaw tightening as he saw whatever was down there. Shit, it's worse than I thought. He turned back to Cass, and for the first time since she'd known him, Derek Blackstone looked genuinely panicked. Cass, listen, I know this is insane, but I need you to trust me right now. We're in serious trouble. Trust you? Cass laughed, but there was no humor in it, only hysteria. You're the man who spent 3 years bulldozing through neighborhoods like some corporate Godzilla. You've destroyed more communities than gentrification and Starbucks combined. Please, just listen for 1 second. The intercom system crackled to life, making them both jump. Mr. Blackstone, this is Entertainment Tonight. We'd like a statement about your surprise wedding to the lawyer who's been trying to bring down your empire. Cass and Derek stared at each other in mutual horror. Surprise wedding? Cass whispered, her voice barely audible. Derek ran both hands through his hair, pacing like a caged panther. When he spoke, his voice was tight with controlled panic. Okay, here's what I've been able to piece together from the evidence. He gestured toward a tablet on the dresser. Apparently, last night, after we ran into each other at Murphy's. Wait, we ran into each other? You threw your drink at me. I deserved it. We started arguing, then somehow ended up doing tequila shots together, and he swallowed hard. We decided to get married, online, through some 24-hour wedding service in Vegas. The whole thing was live-streamed. The room fell silent except for the growing mob outside. Cass processed this information with the methodical precision of the Harvard-trained lawyer she was, which made the conclusion even more horrifying. I married you, drunk, on the internet, in front of witnesses. Apparently, yes. And now it's national news. International, actually. The Tokyo markets are already reacting. Cass stared at him for a long moment, then did something that surprised them both. She started laughing. Not happy laughter, the dangerous kind that meant someone was either having a breakdown or a breakthrough. You know what, Derek? She stood up, wrapping the sheet around herself like a toga, her dark eyes gleaming with something that made him take a step back. This might be the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm sorry, what? Think about it. Cass began pacing, her lawyer brain kicking into high gear. Derek Blackstone, the corporate shark who destroys affordable housing, just married Cassandra Montenegro, the civil rights attorney who's dedicated her career to stopping him. She grinned, and it was terrifying. The optics alone will tank your stock price. Derek's phone started buzzing incessantly. He glanced at the screen and went pale. My board of directors, the Japanese investors, the Seoul development deal. He looked up at her with something between admiration and terror. You're talking about financial warfare. I'm talking about justice, Cass corrected. For every family you've displaced, every community you've gentrified out of existence. Derek answered his phone, his voice immediately shifting into business mode despite his state of undress. Blackstone. A pause. His jaw tightened. What do you mean trending worldwide? No, don't cancel the Singapore presentation, I'll handle this. He hung up and stared at Cass with new respect. You want to destroy me. I want to stop you from destroying others. Cass extended her hand with the confidence of someone playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. So here's my proposal, husband. We stay married for 6 months. Long enough for me to gather inside information on your company's practices, and long enough for you to figure out how to spin this media nightmare. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a business partnership. The same thing you do, just with better intentions. Outside, more news vans were arriving. The sound of helicopter rotors was getting closer. Derek studied her outstretched hand for a long moment, then looked at the chaos beyond his windows, then back at her. Slowly, incredibly, he began to smile, not his usual predatory corporate grin, but something genuine and impressed. You know, Cassandra Montenegro, he said, grasping her hand firmly. I think I might have finally met my match. Don't get too excited, she replied, but her pulse quickened at the warmth of his touch. This is war, not a truce. The best wars usually are. As they shook hands, both felt a spark that had nothing to do with their mutual antagonism, and everything to do with the undeniable chemistry that had probably gotten them into this mess in the first place. From outside, a reporter's voice boomed. Is this a marriage of convenience, or could it be true love? Cass and Derek looked at each other and, despite everything, burst into genuine laughter. Neither of them could have imagined that 6 months later, that reporter's question would be the most important one either of them had ever heard. But that's a story for tomorrow. Tonight, they had a war to plan. Day 1, Monday morning. Absolutely not. Cass stood in the middle of Derek's walk-in closet, which was larger than her entire Brooklyn apartment, holding up a designer dress that probably cost more than her law school loans. I am not wearing a $3,000 outfit to go grocery shopping. Derek emerged from his ensuite bathroom, adjusting his Armani tie with the precision of a man who'd been doing it since prep school. It's Valentino, actually, 4,000. And we're not grocery shopping. We're being photographed grocery shopping. There's a difference. The difference being my soul dies a little more? The difference being we sell this marriage story, or your little legal crusade ends before it starts. Derek's tone was matter-of-fact, but Cass caught something softer in his eyes when he looked at her. The paparazzi have been camped outside since yesterday. Every move we make needs to look convincing. Cass examined her reflection in the full-length mirror. Even in Derek's Columbia University t-shirt and borrowed sweatpants, she looked different here. Less like the scrappy public defender who survived on ramen and righteous fury, more like someone who belonged in this world of marble countertops and imported coffee beans. Fine. But I'm wearing my own shoes. She held up her scuffed Converse sneakers. Derek winced. Those aren't shoes, they're a cry for help. These shoes have walked picket lines, stood in unemployment lines, and kicked down doors of justice. They stay. Something flickered across Derek's face. Surprise, maybe even admiration. You know what? Keep the shoes. It'll look authentic. Their eyes met in the mirror, and for a moment the air crackled with the same electricity from their handshake yesterday. Then Derek's phone buzzed, breaking the spell. My assistant. The car's here. He grabbed his briefcase, then paused. Cass, try not to look like you're planning my murder when we're in public. No promises. Day 2, Tuesday evening. You put what in the risotto? Derek stared at the smoking pan in horror. Sriracha. It needed flavor. Cass waved the bottle triumphantly. Your kitchen has everything except actual food with taste. That was imported arborio rice. From Italy. It cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Yes, you mentioned that. Cass turned off the burner and faced him, hands on her hips. Look, Your Highness, if we're going to survive 6 months of this charade, you need to accept that I don't do bland food, bland conversation, or bland anything. Derek opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Cass had changed into one of his button-down shirts after accidentally splashing olive oil on the Valentino dress. The shirt hung loosely on her frame, and her hair was messily pulled back with what appeared to be a rubber band from his newspaper. She looked. What? Cass caught him staring. Nothing, just you destroyed a $30 portion of rice with a $2 condiment. And made it edible. She grabbed 2 forks and handed him one. Try it. Derek reluctantly took a bite, prepared to prove his point about her culinary vandalism. Instead, his eyes widened. This is actually really good. Don't sound so surprised. I've been cooking since I was 8. My abuela taught me that food without passion is just fuel. Cass took her own bite, then looked at him curiously. When did you learn to cook? I didn't. I have people for that. Of course you do. But she said it without her usual venom. What did you eat growing up? Derek set down his fork, something guarded creeping into his expression. Whatever the kitchen staff prepared, usually alone. The simple statement hung between them, carrying weight that made Cass's chest tighten unexpectedly. She'd been so focused on seeing him as the enemy that she'd never considered the lonely child behind the corporate shark. Well, she said softly, you're not eating alone anymore. Derek met her eyes, and this time, neither of them looked away. Day 3. Wednesday night. You've got to be kidding me. Derek stood in the doorway of his home office, watching Cass sprawled across his Persian rug, surrounded by legal documents, takeout containers, and what appeared to be a makeshift blanket fort constructed from his throw pillows. I work better on the floor. Your fancy desk makes me feel like I'm being judged by dead rich guys. Cass looked up from her laptop, a smudge of ink on her cheek. Also, your couch is terrible for sitting. It's like perching on a marble block. That couch cost $15,000. Highway robbery. Cass patted the space beside her. Come on, sit. I found something interesting in Blackstone Industries' environmental impact reports. Derek hesitated. In his own office, he was king. On the floor in a pillow fort, he'd be equal. Maybe even vulnerable. I don't sit on floors. Your loss. The view of your ceiling is actually pretty nice from down here. Cass went back to her documents. Derek stood there for another moment, then, in a move that would have shocked his entire board of directors, lowered himself onto the rug beside her. This is ridiculous, he muttered, but he was already looking at her screen. This is comfortable, Cass corrected. Look at this. 3 years ago, your company filed reports claiming the Brooklyn Heights development would create minimal environmental disruption. But these internal emails show your own assessments predicted significant damage to the local ecosystem. Derek leaned closer to read, his shoulder brushing hers. Those projections were preliminary. We modified the construction plans. After the permits were approved. Convenient. Cass turned to face him and suddenly realized how close they were. Close enough to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. Close enough to smell his cologne. Something expensive but not overwhelming. Close enough to... Cass. His voice was quieter now. Yeah? You missed a spot. Derek reached out and gently wiped the ink smudge from her cheek with his thumb. The simple touch sent electricity racing through her entire body. This was dangerous territory, not because he was her enemy, but because he was starting not to feel like one. Thanks, she whispered. Neither of them moved. Derek's hand was still cupping her cheek, and Cass found herself leaning into the warmth of it. Then her laptop chimed with an incoming email, shattering the moment. Derek pulled back quickly, running a hand through his hair. I should let you work. Yeah, probably. But as he left, Cass caught herself watching him go, and for the first time since this whole mess started, she wondered if maybe her plan was more dangerous than she'd thought. Not to him, to her. Till day 5, Friday morning. You're jogging wrong, Cass called out, easily keeping pace beside Derek as they circled Central Park. There's a wrong way to jog? Derek was breathing hard, sweat dampening his expensive athletic wear. You're thinking too much. It's supposed to be meditative, not strategic. Cass wasn't even winded. Stop planning your hostile takeovers and just be. I don't just be, I achieve. That's your problem right there. Cass suddenly veered off the main path toward a small hill covered in morning glory flowers. Come on. Where are you, Cass? That's not the designated running trail. But she was already halfway up the hill, laughing as she ran through the wildflowers like some sort of beautiful, chaotic force of nature. Against his better judgment, against everything that had been drilled into him about proper behavior and appropriate boundaries, Derek found himself following her. At the top of the hill, Cass spun around with her arms outstretched, her face tilted toward the sun. She looked radiant. Free. Everything Derek had never allowed himself to be. See? She called out. The city looks different from up here. Derek reached the summit and stopped, breathing heavily. She was right. From here, Manhattan spread out below them like a living map, beautiful and chaotic and real, in a way his corner office view had never captured. He started to say something about property values or development potential, then caught himself. It's beautiful. Cass beamed at him. Now you're getting it. Getting what? How to see instead of calculate. She plopped down in the grass, patting the ground beside her. Sit, watch the city wake up. My suit will survive contact with grass, I promise. Derek sat, his expensive running gear be damned. They watched in comfortable silence as the morning sun painted the skyscrapers gold and the city came alive below them. Can I ask you something? Cass said after a while. Shoot. When did you become so serious? You must have been a kid once. Derek was quiet for so long that Cass thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. I was 8 when my father brought me to my first board meeting. Told me I needed to learn the business because someday it would all be mine. I asked if we could go to the playground afterward, and he said playgrounds were for children who didn't have empires to inherit. Cass felt her heart break a little. That's awful. That's business. Derek shrugged, but there was pain in the gesture. He wasn't wrong. Everything I have, everything I've built, it requires focus, sacrifice. There's no room for what? For this. Derek gestured between them, encompassing the hill, the moment, the impossible connection growing between them despite everything. For feeling like maybe there's more to life than winning. Cass reached over and took his hand. There is more, Derek. So much more. He looked at their intertwined fingers and something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like hope. I'm starting to believe that, he said quietly. They sat there as the sun climbed higher. 2 people from completely different worlds discovering they might not be so different after all. Day 7, Sunday evening. I can't believe you've never seen The Princess Bride, Cass said, scrolling through Derek's Netflix account on his ridiculously large television. I don't watch movies, they're inefficient. Oh, we're fixing that right now. She pressed play and settled back into the couch. The same couch she'd declared uncomfortable a week ago, but which now felt perfectly cozy with Derek's arms stretched along the back of it. "This is ridiculous," Derek muttered as the opening credits rolled. "A fairy tale, really? Just watch, trust me." By the time Wesley revealed himself as the dread Pirate Roberts, Derek was leaning forward, completely absorbed. When Inigo Montoya delivered his famous line, Derek actually laughed out loud. "You're enjoying this," Cass observed with satisfaction. "It's surprisingly well written," Derek admitted. "The dialogue is quite clever. It's a classic for a reason." Cass curled up against his side without thinking about it, and Derek's arm naturally settled around her shoulders. As the movie continued, they found themselves drawing closer, sharing popcorn and commentary. When the credits rolled, neither of them moved. "So," Derek said softly, "what did you think of your first week of marriage?" Cass tilted her head to look at him. "Different than I expected." "Good different or bad different?" "Complicated different." She studied his face, taking in the relaxed expression she'd never seen during their courtroom battles. "You're not what I expected either." "What did you expect?" "A monster," she said honestly. "Someone completely heartless. Someone I could hate easily." "And now?" Cass was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Now I think maybe the real Derek Blackstone got buried under all those business suits and board meetings. But he's still in there." Derek's hand came up to stroke her hair and she leaned into the touch. "What about you?" he asked. "Still planning to destroy me?" "I'm still planning to stop you from hurting people," Cass said. "But maybe there's a way to do that without destroying you in the process." "You mean reforming me?" "I mean helping you remember who you were before you became who you thought you had to be." Derek was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still moving gently through her hair. "Cass? I think this marriage might be the best mistake I ever made." She looked up at him, and the tenderness in his eyes made her breath catch. "Even if it was an accident?" "Especially because it was an accident. I never would have been brave enough to choose this. To choose you." The air between them shifted, charged with possibility. Derek's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip. Cass's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into his touch. "We shouldn't," she whispered. "Probably not," he agreed, but his voice was rough with want. "This complicates everything. Everything's already complicated. Derek, I know this is crazy. I know we're supposed to be enemies, but Cass..." His forehead touched hers. "I can't pretend anymore that this is just strategy." "What is it then?" "I don't know, but I want to find out." When their lips finally met, it wasn't the desperate kiss of enemies becoming lovers. It was soft, tentative, full of wonder and possibility. It tasted like hope and felt like coming home. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "So?" Cass said softly. "What happens now?" Derek smiled, the first completely genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. "Now we figure out what comes after the accident." Outside, the city sparkled with a million lights, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy discovering that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. Monday morning, week 2. Cass woke up to the smell of actual breakfast cooking, not Derek's usual protein shake and newspaper routine. She padded to the kitchen in one of his Columbia t-shirts, which had somehow become her unofficial sleepwear, to find him standing at the stove, attempting to flip what appeared to be pancakes. "Well, this is new," she said, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. The gesture felt natural now, comfortable in a way that should have terrified her but somehow didn't. "Don't get excited. I watched 3 YouTube videos and still managed to burn the first batch." Derek leaned back into her embrace, marveling at how right it felt to start his morning this way instead of with stock reports and hostile takeover strategies. "The effort is what counts." Cass stood on her tiptoes to kiss his neck, and Derek's concentration on the pancakes wavered dangerously. Keep that up and we'll have another burnt batch, he warned, but his voice was warm with affection. Maybe I don't mind burnt pancakes if it means. The penthouse's intercom system crackled to life, cutting through their domestic bliss like a machete. Mr. Blackstone, you have visitors. Your father and the board of directors are on their way up. Derek went rigid in Cass's arms. The spatula clattered to the counter as he spun around, his face draining of color. My father. Here. Now. He ran both hands through his hair, the easy morning intimacy evaporating instantly. Shit. This is bad, Cass. This is really bad. Why, we're married, remember? Isn't that what we're supposed to be selling? You don't understand. My father doesn't just drop by for social visits. If he's here with the board. Derek's jaw tightened. They're planning something that involves removing me from power. Before Cass could respond, the private elevator chimed, and the penthouse doors slid open with the finality of a judge's gavel. Richard Blackstone strode in like he owned the place, which Cass realized with growing dread. He probably did. He was Derek in 30 years. Same piercing green eyes, same commanding presence, but with an additional layer of cold calculation that made her skin crawl. Behind him filed 6 impeccably dressed board members, their expressions ranging from disapproving to openly hostile. Derek. Richard's voice could have frozen champagne. And the infamous Mrs. Blackstone. The way he said her name made it sound like a disease. Father, gentlemen. Derek straightened, and Cass watched in real time as he transformed from the man who'd been making her pancakes into the corporate shark she'd first met in court. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Cut the pleasantries, son. We need to talk. Richard's eyes swept the kitchen, taking in the domestic scene with obvious distaste. About your recent lapse in judgment? My marriage, you mean? Your publicity stunt. Richard's gaze landed on Cass like a laser sight. Though I must admit, Ms. Montenegro, your performance has been quite convincing. Derek's stock prices have actually risen since this little charade began. Cass felt Derek tense beside her, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackstone, but I'm not sure what you're implying. Please. Do you think we're amateurs? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. A drunk Vegas wedding between Derek and the lawyer who's been trying to destroy our company, followed by a perfectly orchestrated media campaign of domestic bliss? It's brilliant, really. Quite the PR coup. Father, Derek started, but Richard cut him off with a raised hand. However, Richard continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. The charade ends now. The board has voted. You're being removed as CEO, effective immediately. The words hit like a physical blow. Cass felt Derek's entire body go rigid, saw his face go completely blank in a way that was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. You can't do that, Derek said quietly. I own 30% of the company. And we own 70%. Democracy in action, son. Richard smiled like a shark scenting blood. Your little marriage stunt might have fooled the media, but it's also highlighted some concerning character traits. Impulsivity, poor judgment, a tendency to prioritize personal desires over corporate interests. Those are the exact qualities that made him the most successful CEO in Blackstone Industries' history, Cass found herself saying, her lawyer instincts kicking in even as her heart raced. And you are? Richard turned his full attention to her, and Cass understood why Derek had spent his childhood walking on eggshells. I'm his wife, and a Harvard-trained attorney who specializes in corporate law. Cass stepped forward, placing herself between Derek and his father. Any attempt to remove Derek without proper cause would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty and grounds for a lawsuit that would tie up this company for years. Clever girl, but you're assuming this marriage is real? Richard's smile widened. Tell me, Ms. Montenegro, exactly how much is Derek paying you for this performance? The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Cass felt Derek's sharp intake of breath, saw the way his hands clenched into fists. That's enough. Derek's voice was low and dangerous. You want to attack me? Fine. But you leave my wife out of this. Wife? Richard laughed outright. Please, Derek. We both know this is nothing more than a business transaction. Just like everything else in your life. You're wrong. The words came out of Derek's mouth with such conviction that everyone in the room turned to stare at him. This marriage... Cass, she's not a business transaction. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. Something shifted in the air. Richard's confident smirk faltered slightly. Derek, one of the board members spoke up. Surely you're not claiming this marriage is legitimate? I'm claiming it's real, Derek said firmly, reaching for Cass's hand. More real than anything else in my life. Cass squeezed his fingers, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Was this still part of their act? Or had something fundamental changed in the space between his father's accusations and Derek's defense of her? Touching, Richard said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. However, real or not, the board's decision stands. You have 24 hours to clean out your office. Actually, a new voice spoke from the elevator. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Everyone turned as Margaret Chen, Derek's longtime assistant and secret weapon, stepped into the penthouse carrying a thick legal folder. Margaret? Derek's surprise was evident. What are you doing here? Saving your ass as usual. Margaret handed the folder to Derek with a satisfaction that was almost visible. Remember that clause you had me research 6 months ago? The one about hostile takeovers and family succession? Derek's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents. The Succession Protection Clause. What clause? Richard's voice had lost all its earlier confidence. The one that states any attempt to remove a family member from executive leadership without unanimous board approval, including the target's own vote, triggers an automatic stock buyback option at premium prices. Derek's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Since I obviously won't be voting to remove myself, this little coup attempt just became very expensive for all of you. That clause hasn't been invoked in decades, one of the board members sputtered. Because no one's been stupid enough to try a power grab this obvious, Margaret said cheerfully. The financial penalties alone would bankrupt most of your personal portfolios. Cass watched the entire dynamic shift in real time. Richard's face went through several interesting color changes, and the board members began exchanging nervous glances. Furthermore, Derek continued, his confidence fully restored, any board member who participated in this attempted coup is now in violation of their fiduciary duties. I believe my wife mentioned something about lawsuits? Multiple lawsuits, Cass confirmed, stepping up beside Derek. Corporate malfeasance, breach of contract, attempted fraud. Should I continue? The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Blackstone, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely defeated. This isn't over, Derek. Yes, it is. Derek's voice was calm but final. And Father, next time you want to visit my home, call first. My wife and I value our privacy. After the board members filed out like a defeated army, the penthouse felt cavernously quiet. Derek slumped against the kitchen counter, the adrenaline leaving his system and taking all his energy with it. Well, Cass said after a moment, that was intense. I'm sorry, Derek said quietly. I should have warned you about my father, about what this world is really like. Derek. Cass moved to stand in front of him, placing her hands on his chest. Look at me. He lifted his eyes to meet hers, and she saw vulnerability there that made her heart ache. What you said in there, about this marriage being real, about me being the best thing that ever happened to you. She took a shaky breath. Did you mean it? Derek was quiet for a long moment, his hands coming up to cover hers. I meant every word, he said finally. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks this stopped being an act for me, Cass. You stopped being a strategy. What am I then? You're the woman I'm falling in love with. His voice was soft, almost wondering. Even though it's crazy, even though we started as enemies, even though I don't deserve you. Cass felt tears prick her eyes. Derek Blackstone, you absolute idiot. That's not exactly the response I was hoping for, he said with a weak smile. You're an idiot because you think you don't deserve love. You're an idiot because you spent so many years listening to people like your father tell you that everything has to be a transaction. She stood on her tiptoes, framing his face with her hands. "And you're an idiot because I'm falling in love with you too, and you should have figured that out days ago." When their lips met this time, it wasn't soft or tentative. It was desperate, full of relief and need and the overwhelming emotion of two people who'd found something they didn't know they were looking for. "So what happens now?" Derek asked when they broke apart, breathing hard. "Now we eat burnt pancakes," Cass said with a smile. "And we figure out how to build something real out of something that started as an accident." Together? Together. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, but inside the penthouse, everything felt perfectly still. Like they'd found the eye of a hurricane they didn't know they'd been living in. For the first time in his life, Derek Blackstone felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Later that evening, "You know," Cass said, curled against Derek's side on the couch they'd finally made comfortable, "your father's going to try again." "Probably," Derek agreed, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "Richard Blackstone doesn't give up easily." "Good thing I don't either." Cass tilted her head to look at him. "And I still have that class action lawsuit, remember? Now I'm fighting for something even more important than justice." "What's that?" "Us." Derek's smile was soft and genuine. "Think we can make it work? A corporate shark and a civil rights crusader." "I think," Cass said, reaching up to kiss him softly, "we're about to find out just how powerful love can be when it's real." 3 weeks later, Thursday morning. "Derek Blackstone, if you think you can bulldoze the community center to build another luxury high-rise, you're out of your damn mind." Cass's voice echoed through the packed Brooklyn Community Center, where 47 families sat in folding chairs, their faces a mixture of hope and desperation. Derek stood at the front of the room in his perfectly tailored suit, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Derek said carefully, addressing the elderly woman who'd been leading the neighborhood resistance for 3 years. "I understand your concerns, but no. You don't understand." Mrs. Rodriguez stood up, all 5 feet of her radiating fury. "This is our home. Our families have lived here for generations." "Which is exactly why," Derek continued, his voice calm despite the hostile crowd, "I'm proposing we renovate the existing buildings instead of demolishing them. Preserve the community while improving living conditions." The room fell silent. This was not what anyone had expected from the Derek Blackstone who'd steamrolled through Brooklyn for the past 5 years. Cass, sitting in the back row wearing her old public defender clothes instead of designer outfits, felt her heart do something complicated. She'd been the one to suggest Derek attend this meeting, partly to test his sincerity about changing, partly because she thought it would be good for him to see the faces behind his development plans. She hadn't expected him to come prepared with a completely reimagined proposal. "What's the catch?" called out Marcus Thompson, a father of 3 who worked 2 jobs to afford his rent. "Men like you don't do charity." Derek's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "You're right. I don't do charity. I do business, but I'm learning that good business doesn't have to destroy communities to be profitable." "Learning from who?" Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Derek's gaze found Cass in the back of the room, and something soft crossed his features. "From my wife." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew about the infamous marriage between the developer and the activist. It had been front-page news for weeks. "Your wife's been fighting us for years," Marcus pointed out. "My wife's been fighting for you for years," Derek corrected. "And she's taught me that there's a difference between building something and building something meaningful." Cass felt tears prick her eyes. This wasn't strategy or performance. This was Derek, genuinely trying to find a way to honor both his business instincts and the values she'd been fighting for. "So, what exactly are you proposing?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, her tone slightly less hostile. Derek clicked a remote, and a projection screen displayed architectural renderings that made the entire room gasp. Instead of the glass and steel monstrosities they'd expected, the images showed beautifully renovated brownstones, a modernized community center, and green spaces that enhanced the neighborhood's character rather than erasing it. Affordable housing that actually stays affordable, Derek explained. Controlled rent increases tied to income levels. Job training programs run out of the community center, and a percentage of any new commercial space reserved for local businesses. And your profit? Marcus asked skeptically. Smaller margins, longer-term returns, but sustainable growth that benefits everyone. Derek's smile was rueful. Turns out there's more than one way to build an empire. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Mrs. Rodriguez spoke up. This is all very nice, Mr. Blackstone, but talk is cheap. How do we know you won't change your mind the minute it becomes inconvenient? Derek was quiet for a moment, then did something that shocked everyone in the room. He walked over to where Cass was sitting and extended his hand to her. Because, he said as she stood and joined him at the front of the room, my wife will be overseeing the entire project, as both legal counsel and community advocate. If I try to screw any of you over, she'll divorce me and take half my assets in the process. The room erupted in surprised laughter, but Cass stared at Derek in shock. Derek, what are you doing? She whispered. Something I should have done years ago, he whispered back, trusting you completely. Later that evening, Derek's penthouse. You realize you just handed me enough power to destroy your entire business model, right? Cass said, pacing around Derek's living room like a caged tiger. I realize I just asked the woman I love to help me build something better than anything I could create on my own. Derek replied calmly from the kitchen, where he was attempting to cook dinner without burning down the penthouse. Derek, this is serious. If this project fails, if the community doesn't trust you, if the investors pull out, then we'll figure something else out. Derek looked up from the stove, his expression serene. Together. How are you so calm about this? Cass stopped pacing to stare at him. You just bet your entire reputation on a woman who spent 2 years trying to destroy your company. I bet my reputation on a woman who spent 2 years fighting for what's right, Derek corrected. There's a difference. Cass felt her throat tighten with emotion. What if I mess this up? What if I'm not smart enough or experienced enough or... Derek turned off the burner and crossed to her in 3 quick strides, cupping her face in his hands. Cassandra Montenegro, he said firmly, you are the smartest, most capable, most passionate person I've ever met. You've already changed me in ways I didn't think were possible. Now I'm asking you to help me change everything else. And if I say no, then I'll respect your decision and find another way to prove to you that I'm serious about becoming the man you make me want to be. Cass searched his eyes, looking for any trace of manipulation or hidden agenda. All she found was love, trust, and a vulnerability that took her breath away. You're really willing to risk everything on this? I'm willing to risk everything on us, Derek said simply. Before Cass could respond, both their phones started buzzing simultaneously. Derek groaned and released her to check his messages. What is it? Cass asked, seeing his expression change. Margaret, emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Derek's face darkened as he read. My father's making another move. Cass grabbed her own phone and felt her blood run cold. Derek? What? There's a video. From today's community meeting. She showed him her screen where a news article was already trending. Blackstone heir caves to activist wife's demands. Derek read over her shoulder, his jaw tightening with each word. The article painted him as weak, manipulated by his wife into making financially disastrous decisions that would bankrupt the company. They're going to use this against you, Cass said quietly. Your father, the board, they're going to say I'm controlling you, that you've lost your business judgment. Let them try. Derek's voice was steel. We knew this would happen eventually. Derek, maybe we should reconsider. Maybe you should distance yourself from the project. Let me handle it independently. No. Derek turned to face her fully. I won't let them drive a wedge between us. I won't let them make you think you're a liability instead of my greatest asset. But your company will survive or it won't. But either way, I'm not going back to being the man I was before you. Derek pulled her into his arms. Cass, listen to me. I spent 30 years building an empire that impressed everyone and fulfilled no one. In 3 weeks with you, I've felt more alive, more purposeful, more myself than in my entire adult life. Even if it costs you everything? You are everything, Derek said simply. Everything else is just business. Cass felt tears spill over at the raw honesty in his voice. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. Which is why we're going to face tomorrow together, and whatever comes after, we'll handle it the same way. Together? Together. As if summoned by their conversation, Derek's phone rang. Margaret's name flashed on the screen. Take it, Cass said. We need to know what we're walking into. Derek answered on speaker. Margaret. Derek, thank God. Are you sitting down? Should I be? Your father's called an emergency shareholder meeting for tomorrow. He's got 3 institutional investors lined up to question your competency, and he's planning to use today's community center meeting as evidence that you're being manipulated into making financially irresponsible decisions. Derek and Cass exchanged a look. How bad is it? Derek asked. Bad, but not unwinnable. I've been pulling strings all evening, and I think I have a way to turn this around. But it's going to require both of you to be completely honest about your relationship. No more pretending this is just strategy. What do you mean? Cass asked. I mean you're going to have to tell the world that you're genuinely in love with each other, and that Derek's business decisions are coming from a place of partnership, not manipulation. Margaret's voice was all business. Think you can handle that? Derek looked at Cass, his eyes full of love and determination. We've been handling it for weeks, he said. Time to make it official. Friday morning, Blackstone Industries boardroom. The boardroom felt like a gladiatorial arena. Richard Blackstone sat at the head of the massive conference table, flanked by board members and 3 stern-faced institutional investors. Financial reports and newspaper clippings were spread across the table like weapons. Derek entered with Cass at his side, both dressed in their most professional attire. But instead of sitting in the chair prepared for him, Derek remained standing, his hand resting protectively on Cass's shoulder. Gentlemen, Richard began, his voice dripping with false concern. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I'm afraid we have a serious problem. He gestured toward a large screen where yesterday's news footage began playing. Derek's voice echoed through the room. My wife will be overseeing the entire project. As you can see, Richard continued, my son has allowed his personal relationship to compromise his business judgment. The proposed Brooklyn project represents a complete abandonment of profitable development practices in favor of social work. Murmurs of concern rippled through the investors. Furthermore, Richard clicked to the next slide showing financial projections. This project will reduce profit margins by 60% and extend payback periods by 15 years. This is not sustainable business practice. This is charity disguised as development. Are you finished? Derek's voice cut through the room like a blade. Richard smiled coldly. Do you have a response to these concerns, Derek? I do. Derek stepped forward, his confidence absolute. But first, I want to address the elephant in the room. You're all here because you think my wife is manipulating me into making bad business decisions. The room was silent. You're right about one thing, Derek continued. My wife has absolutely influenced my business decisions. She's made me realize that sustainable profit comes from building communities, not destroying them. She's shown me that the most successful businesses are the ones that create value for everyone involved, not just shareholders. Romantic sentiment doesn't pay dividends. One of the investors interjected. Actually, it does. Cass stood up, her voice calm and professional. Mr. Harrington, isn't it? Your fund specializes in sustainable development investments? The investor nodded warily. Then you'll be interested to know that community-centered development projects show 30% higher long-term returns than traditional luxury developments, lower vacancy rates, higher community investment, reduced legal challenges, and significantly better public relations value. She's right, Margaret said, entering the room with a stack of reports. I've spent all night pulling comparable market data. Derek's proposal isn't just ethically sound, it's financially superior. Richard's confident expression began to waver. Furthermore, Derek continued, my wife isn't just my partner in life. She's now my partner in business. Effective immediately, Cassandra Montenegro Blackstone will be joining Blackstone Industries as Director of Community Development and Legal Affairs. The room erupted in surprised voices, but Derek raised his hand for silence. This company has spent decades building structures. It's time we started building communities. And there's no one better qualified to lead that initiative than the woman who's been fighting for communities her entire career. Richard stood up, his face red with rage. This is ridiculous. You're letting emotion override logic. No, Father, Derek said quietly. I'm finally letting my heart inform my head instead of ignoring it completely. He turned to address the room. Gentlemen, you have a choice. You can continue to support the old Blackstone Industries, profitable in the short term, but increasingly unsustainable in a world that demands corporate responsibility. Or you can invest in the future we're building together, profitable, sustainable, and meaningful. And if we choose the former, one of the board members asked. Then you'll be doing it without me, Derek said simply. I resign as CEO effective immediately. The room exploded in chaos. Richard looked triumphant, the board members looked panicked, and the investors looked confused. However, Derek continued, his voice cutting through the noise, I'm also announcing the formation of Montenegro Blackstone Development, a new company dedicated to sustainable community development. We'll be taking the Brooklyn project with us, along with any investors who are interested in profits with purpose. You can't do that, Richard sputtered. Actually, I can, Cass said with a smile. Derek owns the Brooklyn project personally, not through Blackstone Industries. It's all perfectly legal. Margaret stepped forward with another folder. And we already have 3 major investors lined up who are very interested in this new approach. The room fell silent as everyone processed what had just happened. Derek had just walked away from his family empire to build something new with the woman he loved. So, Derek said, taking Cass's hand, who's ready to change the world? As they walked out of the boardroom together, leaving chaos in their wake, Cass squeezed Derek's hand. Any regrets? She asked softly. Derek looked at her, really looked at her, and smiled. Only that it took me so long to realize that the best business decision I ever made was falling in love with you. Outside the boardroom, their new life was waiting. 6 months later, early morning in Brooklyn, the sound of construction mixed with laughter drifted through the open windows of what had once been Derek's sterile penthouse office. Now the space buzzed with the energy of Montenegro Blackstone Development's headquarters, a converted brownstone in the heart of the community they were helping to rebuild. Cass stood at the window, coffee mug in hand, watching Derek below as he argued good-naturedly with Marcus Thompson about the proper way to install community garden irrigation. Both men were covered in dirt, their expensive work clothes abandoned weeks ago in favor of practical jeans and work boots. Never thought I'd see the day when Derek Blackstone would voluntarily get his hands dirty, Margaret said, joining Cass at the window with her own coffee. Never thought I'd see the day when I'd be running a development company instead of fighting one, Cass replied with a smile. Life's funny that way. How funny? The Brooklyn project is ahead of schedule and under budget. You've got 3 more communities asking for the Montenegro Blackstone treatment, and Forbes wants to do a cover story on the developer who chose love over profit. Margaret grinned. Plus, your husband looks ridiculously happy for a man who just walked away from a billion-dollar empire. Cass watched Derek throw his head back and laugh at something Mrs. Rodriguez said as she supervised the garden installation with the authority of a 5-star general. He did look happy, genuinely, completely happy in a way she'd never seen during their courtroom battles. He's different, Cass said softly. We both are. Different how? Free, Cass said simply. For the first time in our lives, we're building something because we want to, not because we have to. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and Cass frowned as she read it. What's wrong? Margaret asked, noticing the change in her expression. Richard Blackstone wants to meet with me. Alone. Cass showed Margaret the message. Today, at the plaza. That can't be good. Definitely not. Cass was already reaching for her jacket. Can you handle things here while I go see what Derek's father wants? Of course. But Cass? Margaret's expression was serious. Be careful. Richard Blackstone doesn't do anything without an agenda. 2 hours later, the Plaza Hotel. Richard Blackstone sat in the hotel's oak room like a king holding court, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit impeccable despite the early hour. He stood when Cass approached, extending his hand with the practiced charm of a man who'd spent decades manipulating people. Cassandra, thank you for coming. Mr. Blackstone. Cass ignored the offered hand and sat across from him, her posture alert and professional. What do you want? Straight to the point. I appreciate that. Richard signaled the waiter for coffee before turning his attention back to her. I want to make you an offer. I'm not interested. You haven't heard it yet. I don't need to. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. $50 million. Cass blinked. Excuse me? $50 million, transferred to an account of your choosing, in exchange for a quiet divorce from my son. The words hit like a physical blow. Cass felt her coffee cup rattle against the saucer as she set it down with shaking hands. You want to pay me to divorce Derek? I want to pay you to give him back his life, Richard corrected. Look around, Cassandra. Really look. 6 months ago, Derek was the heir to a billion-dollar empire. Now he's playing in the dirt with community organizers and small-time contractors. You've turned one of the most powerful men in Manhattan into a glorified social worker. Derek chose this life, Cass said firmly, though Richard's words were hitting uncomfortably close to fears she'd been trying to ignore. Derek chose you, Richard countered. And in doing so, he sacrificed everything he'd worked for his entire life. Do you really think that's sustainable? Do you think he won't eventually resent you for what he's given up? Derek is happy. Derek is infatuated. Richard interrupted. There's a difference. Infatuation fades, Cassandra. And when it does, what will you have left? A man who gave up his birthright for a woman who convinced him to abandon everything that made him who he was. Cass felt doubt creeping in like poison. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Richard leaned forward, his eyes sharp as surgical instruments. Tell me, Cassandra, when was the last time Derek talked about expanding the business, about taking on bigger projects, about building something that would last generations? We're building something meaningful. You're building a charity with delusions of grandeur. Richard's voice was soft but cutting. And deep down you know it. You know that Derek is capable of so much more than community gardens and affordable housing. You know that by staying with him, you're limiting him to your level instead of allowing him to reach his potential. The words found their mark, striking at insecurities Cass had been trying to suppress for months. Was she holding Derek back? Had she turned a corporate titan into something smaller, diminished? $50 million, Richard repeated. Enough to fund every social justice cause you've ever dreamed of supporting. Enough to help communities across the country, not just one neighborhood in Brooklyn. All you have to do is walk away and let Derek reclaim his destiny. Cass stared at the check Richard placed on the table between them. The amount was staggering, enough to change thousands of lives. What makes you think Derek would even take you back? She asked quietly. Blood is thicker than water, my dear, and business is thicker than blood. Derek may think he's happy playing house with you, but eventually he'll remember what it feels like to build empires instead of flower boxes. Richard stood, leaving the check on the table. Think about it, Cassandra. Really think about what's best for Derek. And when you're ready to do the right thing, call me. As he walked away, Cass stared at the check, her mind spinning with doubt and possibility in equal measure. That evening, Montenegro Blackstone headquarters. Derek found Cass sitting alone in their office long after everyone else had gone home, staring out the window at the community they'd been building together. She hadn't touched the dinner he'd brought her, hadn't responded to his attempts at conversation. Okay, he said finally, sitting on the edge of her desk. What's wrong? Nothing, Cass said, but her voice was flat, distant. Cassandra Montenegro Blackstone, you are many things, but a good liar isn't one of them. Derek gently turned her chair so she was facing him. Talk to me. For a moment, Cass almost didn't tell him. Almost kept Richard's offer to herself and pretended everything was fine. But looking into Derek's concerned green eyes, she couldn't maintain the pretense. Your father made me an offer today. Derek's expression immediately hardened. What kind of offer? $50 million to divorce you and give you back your real life. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's jaw worked as he processed this information, his hands clenching into fists. And? He said finally. And what? And what did you tell him? Cass looked away. I didn't tell him anything. I took the check and left. You took the check. Derek's voice was carefully neutral. Derek, do you have it? The check? Cass reached into her purse and pulled out the folded paper, placing it on the desk between them. Derek stared at it like it might explode. $50 million, he said quietly. It's a lot of money, Cass whispered. It is. Enough to help a lot of people. It would be. They sat in silence for a long moment, the check lying between them like a chasm. Derek, Cass said finally. What if he's right? About what? About me holding you back. About you giving up too much. She met his eyes, her own bright with unshed tears. 6 months ago, you were running $1 billion company. Now you're installing irrigation systems and arguing with city planners about handicap accessibility. What if you wake up one day and realize you traded an empire for a garden? Derek was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he started laughing. Derek, this isn't funny. Oh, but it is, he said, standing up and pulling her into his arms. It's hilarious. My father thinks he can buy you away from me for $50 million. It's not about the money. Isn't it? Derek cupped her face in his hands, his eyes sparkling with amusement and love. Cass, do you know what my net worth was 6 months ago? I don't. $800 million. Do you know what it is now? Cass shook her head. 12 million. And climbing. Derek's smile was radiant. Because turns out, when you build communities instead of destroying them, when you create partnerships instead of hostile takeovers, when you actually care about the people you're working with, you make more money, not less. But your father said, my father is a dinosaur who thinks the only way to measure success is by how many people you crush on your way to the top. Derek kissed her forehead tenderly. Cass, listen to me. In the past 6 months, I've been happier, more fulfilled, more myself than in my entire life. I haven't given up an empire. I've built a better one. With you. But what if nothing? Derek picked up the check and, without hesitation, tore it into tiny pieces. My father can't buy you because you're not for sale. And he can't buy me back because I was never his to begin with. Cass felt tears spill over as she watched the pieces of the check flutter to the floor like confetti. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. And Cass? Derek pulled her closer, his voice soft but certain. The life we're building together? This is just the beginning. As if summoned by his words, Cass's phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. Emergency. Good news emergency. Call me now. Derek and Cass looked at each other and laughed. Think we can handle one more plot twist? Derek asked. With you? I can handle anything. The next morning, Montenegro Blackstone headquarters. Are you both sitting down? Margaret asked, practically vibrating with excitement as she stood in front of their desk with a tablet in her hands. Should we be? Cass asked, still half asleep despite her second cup of coffee. Yes, definitely yes. Margaret grinned. I just got off the phone with 3 different investors, 2 city planning committees, and the mayor's office. And? Derek prompted. And Montenegro Blackstone Development has officially been selected to lead the largest urban renewal project in New York City history. 47 blocks of sustainable, community-centered development. Budget, $2 billion. Derek and Cass stared at her in stunned silence. $2 billion, Cass repeated faintly. With a B, Margaret confirmed. They want the Brooklyn model applied to 4 different neighborhoods across the city. Mixed income housing, community centers, local business support, environmental sustainability, the whole package. Derek sank back in his chair, looking dazed. That's larger than anything Blackstone Industries ever handled, Margaret finished. Congratulations, you two. You just became the most successful development company in the city. Cass turned to Derek, her eyes wide with wonder. We did it. We did it, he agreed, pulling her into his arms. And the best part? Margaret continued, her grin widening. The announcement is going out this afternoon, which means your father is about to find out that his son didn't give up an empire. He built a bigger one. Derek and Cass looked at each other and burst into laughter, the sound echoing through their office and drifting out to the construction site below, where Mrs. Rodriguez was already planning the victory celebration. Some accidents, it turned out, were the best things that ever happened. 1 year later, Brooklyn Community Center grand opening, the late afternoon sun cast golden light across the transformed neighborhood, illuminating what had once been a collection of crumbling buildings and was now a vibrant community that felt like something out of a dream. Children's laughter echoed from the new playground. Elderly residents sat on benches playing chess under shade trees that hadn't existed a year ago, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the local bakery that had been saved and renovated as part of the project. Cass stood on the steps of the newly opened community center, watching Derek cut the ribbon with Mrs. Rodriguez while a crowd of several hundred neighbors, city officials, and media representatives cheered. He looked completely at home in his jeans and Montenegro Blackstone Development polo shirt, his face radiant with genuine joy as he handed the ceremonial scissors to Mrs. Rodriguez so she could make the final cut. Never gets old, does it? Margaret said, appearing at Cass's side with 2 glasses of champagne. Watching your husband be happy. It really doesn't. Cass agreed, accepting the glass. Though I still can't believe this is our life. What, being disgustingly successful while also being disgustingly in love? Margaret grinned. Some people have all the luck. Some people have all the accidents, Cass corrected with a laugh. Around them, the celebration was in full swing. A local mariachi band played while food trucks served everything from authentic tacos to gourmet ice cream. Children ran between the adults, their faces painted with superheroes and flowers, while teenagers practiced skateboard tricks on the new ramps that had been specifically designed into the community space. Cassandra Montenegro Blackstone. Cass turned to see Mayor Patricia Williams approaching with a broad smile and what appeared to be a very official-looking folder. Madam Mayor, Cass said, accepting the woman's enthusiastic handshake. Thank you for being here today. Are you kidding? This is the crown jewel of urban development. I should be thanking you. The mayor's expression turned more serious. In fact, that's exactly what I'm here to do, officially. She opened the folder and pulled out an elegant certificate. By the power vested in me by the City of New York, I hereby present Montenegro Blackstone Development with the key to the city for outstanding contributions to urban renewal and community development. The crowd around them erupted in applause as photographers captured the moment. Cass felt tears prick her eyes as she accepted the heavy golden key. Furthermore, Mayor Williams continued, the City Council has voted unanimously to name this community center the Montenegro Blackstone Community Innovation Center, in honor of your groundbreaking approach to development that puts people before profits. I don't know what to say, Cass managed, her voice thick with emotion. Say you'll accept the city's offer to lead the new Department of Sustainable Urban Development, the mayor said with a mischievous smile. Because we've just created the position specifically for you. Cass nearly dropped her champagne. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you the chance to transform how this entire city approaches development. Full budget authority, direct report to me, and the mandate to implement the Montenegro Blackstone model citywide. Mayor Williams' smile widened. What do you say? Before Cass could respond, strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind and Derek's voice whispered in her ear. Say yes, he murmured. Say yes to changing the world. Cass leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the absolute certainty of their partnership. I say yes, she told the mayor. But only if Derek agrees to be my primary consultant on all projects. Deal, Mayor Williams said immediately. The city would be lucky to have both of you. As the mayor walked away to announce the news to the crowd, Derek spun Cass around to face him, his eyes shining with pride and love. Director Montenegro Blackstone, he said formally, then broke into a grin. I like the sound of that. It has a nice ring to it, Cass agreed. Though I have to admit I'm getting used to hyphenated names. Speaking of which, Derek's expression shifted, becoming almost nervous. There's something I wanted to talk to you about. Derek Blackstone, if you're about to tell me you've made another massive life decision without consulting me. Not exactly. Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Cass's heart stop completely. More like asking permission for one. The sounds of the celebration faded into background noise as Derek dropped to one knee right there on the community center steps, surrounded by hundreds of people who had become their extended family over the past year. Cassandra Montenegro, Derek said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet crowd. A year and a half ago, we woke up married to each other by accident. We were enemies who couldn't stand each other, and somehow we managed to build something real out of that impossible beginning. Cass felt tears streaming down her face as she stared down at the man who had transformed from her greatest adversary into her greatest love. You've changed my life in every possible way, Derek continued. You've made me a better man, a better businessman, and somehow, impossibly, a better human being. You've taught me that the most important thing you can build isn't a skyscraper or an empire. It's a life with the person you love. He opened the velvet box to reveal the most beautiful ring Cass had ever seen. Not massive or ostentatious, but elegant and perfect, with a diamond that caught the afternoon light like captured starfire. So I'm asking you, officially this time with no alcohol involved and in front of everyone who matters to us, will you marry me? For real this time? For forever this time? The crowd held its collective breath. Cass looked down at Derek, at his hopeful green eyes and nervous smile, at the ring that represented everything they'd built together, and felt her heart overflow with love so complete, it was almost overwhelming. Derek Blackstone, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. You beautiful, wonderful, impossible man, we're already married. The crowd burst into laughter, and Derek's face broke into the most radiant smile she'd ever seen. I know, he said, standing up and slipping the ring onto her finger next to the simple wedding band she'd never taken off. But I wanted to do it right this time. I wanted to choose you on purpose. In that case, Cass said, throwing her arms around his neck. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Forever and always yes. When their lips met, the crowd erupted in cheers that could probably be heard in Manhattan. Mrs. Rodriguez shouted something in Spanish that made the mariachi band launch into a triumphant wedding march. Children threw flower petals they'd grabbed from the community garden, and Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while muttering about ridiculous romantic people. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Derek rested his forehead against Cass's. So, he said softly, how does it feel to be engaged to your own husband? Like the best kind of crazy, Cass replied. How does it feel to propose to your own wife? Like coming home. That evening, rooftop of Montenegro Blackstone headquarters, as the sun set over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Derek and Cass sat on the rooftop terrace they'd created above their offices. Below them, the community they'd helped build glowed with warm light from windows and street lamps, alive with the sounds of families gathering for dinner and friends calling goodbyes across the street. So, Cass said, curled against Derek's side on the comfortable outdoor couch they'd installed for exactly these moments, what's next for us? Well, Derek said thoughtfully, his arm tightening around her, you're about to become the most powerful urban development official in the city. I'm about to expand Montenegro Blackstone to 3 more cities. We're planning a real wedding for this summer. Don't forget the house hunting, Cass added. I love our office apartment, but I'm thinking we might want something with an actual bedroom that isn't also our conference room. And maybe a yard, Derek said, for the kids. Cass turned to look at him, her heart skipping. Kids? Eventually, Derek said, his cheeks slightly pink. If you want them. I know we haven't really talked about it, but I want them, Cass said softly. Little Derek Blackstone's running around causing trouble and charming their way out of it. Little Cassandra Montenegro's fighting injustice and terrifying corporate lawyers, Derek countered. Little Montenegro Blackstones, Cass corrected. Hyphenated names for everyone. I love that, Derek said, kissing the top of her head. I love you. I love this life we've built. Even though it started as an accident? Especially because it started as an accident. Derek shifted so he could look at her properly. Cass, if someone had told me 2 years ago that the best thing that would ever happen to me would be accidentally marrying my worst enemy while drunk in Vegas, I would have had them committed. And now? Now I think maybe the universe knew what it was doing. Maybe we needed to start as enemies so we could appreciate what it means to be partners. Maybe we needed the accident to give us permission to be brave enough for the real thing. Cass reached up to trace his jawline with her finger, marveling at how familiar and wonderful this face had become. You know what I think? She said. What? I think some accidents aren't accidents at all. I think some accidents are just destiny taking a shortcut. Derek's smile was soft and wondering. Destiny taking a shortcut. I like that. Good, Cass said, settling back against his chest. Because I have a feeling our destiny is just getting started. As if to prove her point, Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Just got a call from Seattle. They want to discuss bringing the Montenegro Blackstone model to the Pacific Northwest. Also, your father called. He wants to discuss terms for a possible partnership. Also, someone from Netflix wants to option your love story. It's been a busy day. Congratulations on the engagement to your own wife, you ridiculous people. Derek and Cass read the message together and burst into laughter. Seattle? Cass asked. Why not? Derek replied. We've got experience with impossible projects. Netflix? Absolutely not. Our story is too good to be fiction. Your father? Derek was quiet for a moment, then smiled. You know what? Maybe. If he's really ready to change, people can surprise you. Like accidentally marrying someone you can't stand and falling in love with them. Exactly like that. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, the city settling into its evening rhythm around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new adventures. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged. Together, surrounded by the community they'd helped create, building a future that was better than anything either of them could have imagined alone. Derek? Cass said softly. Thank you. For what? For being brave enough to fall in love with your enemy. Derek's laugh was warm and full of promise. Thank you for being worth falling in love with. As the lights of Brooklyn twinkled below them like earthbound stars, Derek and Cass held each other close and dreamed about the future they would build together. One accidentally perfect day at a time. Epilogue. 5 years later. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Montenegro Blackstone family home in Park Slope, illuminating a scene of beautiful chaos. 4-year-old Sophia Montenegro Blackstone sat at the kitchen table, her dark curls wild with sleep, carefully arranging cereal pieces into what appeared to be architectural blueprints, while her baby brother Miguel gurgled happily from his high chair. Mama, Sophia called out. I'm building a community center for my bears. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Cass replied from the stove, where she was somehow managing to make pancakes, pack lunches, and review development proposals simultaneously. Make sure it has good wheelchair access. Of course it does, Sophia said with the serious tone of a child who'd been raised at construction sites. And solar panels. And a garden. Derek appeared in the doorway, his tie askew and his hair mussed from his morning wrestling match with Miguel over the strategic importance of wearing pants to daycare. Crisis averted, he announced. Miguel has agreed to wear clothes in exchange for extra story time tonight. Excellent negotiation, Cass said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him good morning. very diplomatic. I learned from the best. Derek stole another kiss before turning to Sophia. What are you building today, architect? A whole city, Sophia announced proudly, with houses for everyone and parks and places for people to work and play and be happy. Derek and Cass exchanged a look over their daughter's head, both thinking the same thing. Some dreams really do come true. Sounds perfect, Derek said, ruffling Sophia's hair. Need any investors? Nope, Sophia said seriously, but I might need some help with the engineering. The Bear Community Center keeps falling down. I think we can arrange that, Cass said with a smile. As they got the family ready for another day of building dreams together, Derek caught Cass's hand and squeezed it gently. Any regrets? He asked, their old morning ritual. Only that it took us so long to figure out we were perfect for each other, Cass replied, their traditional response. Good thing we had that accident, Derek said. Best accident ever, Cass agreed. Outside, the city they'd helped transform hummed with life and possibility. Inside, the family they'd built by accident and kept on purpose prepared to face another day of adventures together. Some love stories begin with meeting across a crowded room. Some begin with love at first sight. And some begin with waking up married to your worst enemy and discovering that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. Derek and Cass had always been fond of that last kind. The end.